I'm happy and proud to be standing here years after I first heard the score to celebrate the man who wrote it.
I know how to make movies. I went to film school. I have a knack for it. I studied it very well and practiced, and I know what I'm doing.
Whatever you do, don't do those artsy, abstract movies. I dare you to do a comedy. I said, for God's sake.
George Walton Lucas Jr. was born on May 14, 1944, in Modesto, California. His father ran a small stationery store and Walnut Ranch, while his mother struggled with health problems, leaving George to grow up in a home that often felt strict and empty. His childhood was shaped by discipline and expectations, but George always felt different from what his family wanted for him. His father imagined him taking over the family business one day, yet George's imagination was always elsewhere. When Disneyland opened in 1955, the Lucas family visited, and young George was deeply inspired by its storytelling and fantasy. He began dreaming about worlds far beyond Modesto. He loved comic books, adventure stories like Treasure Island, and, above all, sci-fi shows like Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers. These stories fired up his creativity, and he began sketching spaceships, aliens, and adventure scenes in notebooks. At school, he was shy and introverted, often bullied and overlooked, but he found confidence through photography. Holding a camera, he became an observer and storyteller rather than just a quiet boy in the crowd. His fascination with cars also grew, and by his teenage years, he was racing a small yellow Auto Bianchina, while also filming races with an 8mm camera. These two passions, cars and cameras, were slowly shaping his future, even though no one around him realized it. At the time, everything changed on June 12, 1962. Just days before George's high school graduation, while driving home in his Bianchina, a classmate in a Chevrolet Impala crashed into him. The small car flipped repeatedly before smashing into a walnut tree. George was thrown from the wreck just before it was crushed, an accident that saved his life but left him on the brink of death. Paramedics found him not breathing, with broken ribs and collapsed lungs. For weeks, he hovered between life and death, and doctors doubted he would survive. Against all odds, George pulled through, but he was bedridden for months. During recovery, he couldn't race or do physical activities, so he turned to reading. He devoured books on philosophy, mythology, and anthropology, discovering new ways of thinking about life, destiny, and human stories. This period transformed him from a poor student into someone deeply curious about the world. The near-death experience also gave him survivor's guilt. He often wondered why he had lived when he could have died. This theme of destiny and the fragile line between life and death would later become central to his storytelling in Star Wars. By the time he recovered, George decided he would make something meaningful out of his life. He enrolled at Modesto Junior College, took film classes, and soon after, transferred to USC's School of Cinematic Arts, where his true journey began. At USC, George Lucas found his passion. He made short experimental films like Electronic Labyrinth, THX 1138, for EB, which impressed critics and won him awards. He learned from great mentors about editing, composition, and the power of montage, and quickly built a reputation for being hardworking, creative, and innovative. He also made important friends, including Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, and other young filmmakers who would go on to change Hollywood. After graduation, Lucas directed his first feature film, THX 1138. Though artistically ambitious, it was a commercial failure. Warner Brothers not only cut parts of the film without his permission, but also pulled support for future projects. Lucas felt betrayed and humiliated, almost quitting filmmaking altogether. Yet this painful failure taught him something important. To survive in Hollywood, he needed to balance art with entertainment. His second attempt came with American Graffiti in 1973. Made for less than $1 million. The film shocked everyone by becoming a massive hit, earning over $140 million and even securing Oscar nominations. With that success, Lucas finally had the freedom to try something bigger. he turned back to his childhood love of Flash Gordon, and when he couldn't get the rights, he began creating something original, what would eventually become Star Wars. Lucas started writing his space story in 1973, originally calling it Journal of the Whills. Early drafts were rough, borrowing heavily from pulp novels and Japanese samurai films. But Lucas kept rewriting, drawing inspiration from Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Slowly, he built a mythic story about heroes, destiny, and rebellion. In 1975, 20th Century Fox gave him a contract for Star Wars. Though the studio didn't believe in it, Lucas made a bold deal. He lowered his directing fee in exchange for merchandising rights. The studio thought toys were worthless, but this decision would later make Lucas a billionaire. Filming, however, was a nightmare. On location in Tunisia, rainstorms destroyed sets, actors got sick, and the crew mocked the movie. At Industrial Light and Magic, special effects were behind schedule, and Lucas nearly had a breakdown from the stress. Even actors like Harrison Ford doubted the script. By the time Star Wars premiered in 1977, Lucas thought it would flop. Instead, it became one of the biggest films of all time, earning $775 million and changing cinema forever. The sequels, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, cemented Lucas's empire. But behind the success were personal and professional struggles that nearly destroyed Empire. Star Wars made George Lucas one of the most powerful filmmakers in the world. It also took a heavy toll. The pressure of financing and controlling every detail strained his relationships. His company, Lucasfilm, faced setbacks, and his marriage to editor Marsha Lucas collapsed in 1983. The divorce cost him tens of millions of dollars and left him emotionally devastated. Marsha had been not only his wife, but also a creative partner, editing Star Wars and helping shape its emotional impact. Losing her left Lucas isolated, even as his career soared. To keep his company afloat, he sold off divisions, one of which became Pixar after Steve Jobs bought it. What Lucas saw as a failed project would go on to redefine animation forever. Meanwhile, he poured his energy into sequels and spin-offs, building Skywalker Ranch as his private creative fortress. Yet even there, he struggled with loneliness and the crushing weight of expectations. The darker tone of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in 1984 reflected his personal pain, and controversy over its violence led to the creation of the PG-13 rating. Lucas had built an empire, but he was beginning to feel trapped inside it. Facing growing criticism and internal battles about his creative choices. In 1999, George Lucas returned to directing with The Phantom Menace, the first of the Star Wars prequels. Fans were excited, but the reaction was brutal. The character Jar Jar Binks became the target of widespread hate, and actor Ahmed Best later revealed the backlash nearly drove him to end his life. Lucas pressed forward with Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, pioneering digital filmmaking. But facing constant criticism for wooden dialogue, overuse of CGI, and weak storytelling, while the prequels made billions at the box office, fans felt betrayed, and petitions circulated demanding remakes. Lucas became reclusive, working long hours in isolation at Skywalker Ranch, often battling insomnia and depression. He described himself as living in a beautiful prison, trapped by his own creation. Despite the money and fame, he struggled with the relentless negativity. By 2012, he was exhausted and ready to step away. That year, he sold Lucasfilm to Disney for $4.05 billion, a deal that included Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and his special effects divisions. Though he became one of the richest filmmakers in history, he later admitted he felt like he had given away his children, expressing bitterness when Disney ignored his story ideas for the sequels. Today, at 81 years old, George Lucas is no longer making Star Wars films, but he is shaping a different kind of legacy. In 2025, he surprised fans by appearing at Comic-Con, not to talk about his films, but to introduce his lifelong passion project, the Lucas Museum of Narrative Art, set to open in Los Angeles in 2026. The museum will showcase his $1 billion collection of paintings, illustrations, and storytelling art from across history. For Lucas, this is not about money, but about emotion, the universal power of stories that connect people. From a boy in Modesto dreaming of Flash Gordon to the creator of one of the greatest film franchises in history, Lucas has lived a life full of triumphs, betrayals, risks, and reinvention. His story is one of survival, imagination, and resilience. Even after decades of criticism and controversy, his influence on cinema is undeniable. At 81, he seems less concerned about fan reactions and more focused on leaving behind a legacy that celebrates creativity itself. His journey shows that destiny is not just about success or failure, it is about continuing to create, even when the world doesn't always understand. George Walton Lucas Jr. was born on May 14, 1944, in Modesto, California, into a family that valued hard work and tradition. His father, George Lucas Sr., expected his son to one day take over the family's office supply store and Walnut Ranch, but George Jr. never fit that mold. He was small, shy, and often lost in his imagination. His mother, Dorothy, suffered from health issues that left her unable to fully nurture him, which only deepened his sense of isolation. The young Lucas found comfort in stories, comic books, adventure serials, and Saturday matinee shows filled his mind with other worlds. When Disneyland opened in 1955, his family visited, and George was amazed. Walt Disney had created an entire world of fantasy, and that idea never left him. At school, Lucas was not a strong student. He had poor grades and often struggled to concentrate, which frustrated his father. But George had two passions: cameras and cars. With his 8mm camera, he filmed his friends racing, experimenting with editing tricks. Cars became his escape. He loved their speed, design, and freedom. By the time he was a teenager, he was racing regularly. In his little Auto Bianchi Bianchina, he felt alive in a way he never did in class. Nobody, not even George, realized these two passions, film and cars, would one day collide and shape his destiny. On June 12, 1962, just days before high school graduation, Lucas's life almost ended. Driving his Bianchina home, he was struck by a classmate's Chevy Impala. The small car flipped multiple times before hitting a tree. The seatbelt snapped, flinging Lucas onto the road just moments before the wreck was crushed. When paramedics arrived, he wasn't breathing. His lungs had collapsed, ribs were broken, and his skin had turned blue. He barely survived, spending weeks in the hospital and months bedridden. The accident was a turning point. Unable to race or even move normally, George turned inward. He began reading obsessively, diving into philosophy, history, and mythology. For the first time, he started thinking about destiny, fate, and the meaning of life. Why had he survived when death seemed certain? That question would echo in his later stories, where heroes constantly face destiny and near-death experiences. When he recovered, George abandoned racing dreams and enrolled at Modesto Junior College. He studied photography and film before transferring to USC's School of Cinematic Arts. There, he discovered a new passion: storytelling through film. At USC, Lucas's creativity exploded. He made experimental shorts like Look at Life and Electronic Labyrinth, THX 1138 for EB, which earned student awards. Unlike many classmates, Lucas wasn't interested in traditional Hollywood filmmaking. He loved abstract visuals, sound design, and pushing the limits of technology. His professors saw his discipline and raw vision. Even if his work was unusual, Lucas formed lifelong friendships at USC, including with Steven Spielberg and Francis Ford Coppola. Together, they would one day reshape Hollywood. But Lucas's early career wasn't easy. His first feature film, THX 1138, 1971, expanded from his short film, was ambitious but cold and strange for mainstream audiences. Warner Brothers interfered, cutting scenes, and the film flopped. Lucas was devastated. He felt humiliated, betrayed, and unsure if he had a future in film. Instead of giving up, Lucas pivoted. Inspired by his youth, he wrote and directed American Graffiti, 1973, a nostalgic film about teenage